I chose to have the service guy drive me home rather than back to the office because it was Friday and I had just dropped off my Volvo to be serviced. He would return it to me when he got home. My decision was made for me by the warm late spring afternoon and some yard work that needed to be done at home. I was raking leaves in our large backyard when I noticed my brother's red Corvette pull into our driveway. Our backyard is quite large. Fantastic, I thought. He only ever comes here to borrow something, and he hardly ever returns it. "Hey Dad, what brings you to the land of chickens?" my son Sam called out as I was getting close to the driveway. "Dad? Why is this the land of the chickens, and why did my son call my brother Dad?" In response, my brother said, "I'm bringing Uncle Joe's circular saw back. I unintentionally severed the power cable. I need to finish my project at home, so he needs to get it fixed." "Is Clueless Joe around?" "Clueless Joe?" Joe is my name, and I don't really consider myself to be a moron. Perhaps I am. Perhaps I ought to just listen to this rude exchange from outside the garage. Naturally, I activated my phone to capture the exchange. "Clueless Carl isn't here," remarked Sam. "No, I don't think he's home because he rarely returns before 5 and I try not to spend a lot of time with him." "Okay, so now that school is out, when can I come over to your place and hang out? It's far more enjoyable than being in this area. Your mother wants to spend as much time as possible with you, as much as I would love for you to come and stay. She will be alone when you go because you are her only child. Let her off the hook on this one. I'm going to ask her about you staying with me for a week or two this summer when she comes to visit on Thursday afternoon." My son's question, "Why doesn't Mom divorce Clueless and move in with you?" made me shiver. She regularly spent the afternoons at his house. I had no idea. Oh no, things that I really didn't like were starting to come together. Perhaps I have no idea. What was happening was crushing my thoughts. Eric boasted, "I've asked her that every month ever since I got her pregnant with you." "No, you make amazing sex, but you would make a terrible husband," she replies. "My spouse is someone I truly adore and value. I feel like the luckiest woman alive every time I spend time with him. Well, I have earth-shaking orgasms with you, but he makes me feel loved. I don't love you, and I do love him. That's why, my son, she will occasionally screw Eric Tindle, but not divorce Joe Tindle. I've got to go now, but I'll see you at your grandparents' tomorrow at noon for the annual family birthday party and Memorial Day lunch." At this point, I slid into my hosta garden by sliding down the side of my garage wall, my legs turning to spaghetti. My entire world fell apart. It hurt like hell to realize that my son wasn't my biological son. It was too much to handle when my wife became pregnant through my brother and regularly cheated on him. I returned to my workspace by some means, and I sat on the rope swing, a device on which I had delighted my son for many hours by pushing him. I sobbed while sitting on this swing until I had a large puddle of mud at my feet. How was I supposed to proceed? I had to evaluate everything before I took any action. Then I remembered my salvation, the DNA test I took a few years prior. Sam, Carol, and I all completed the 23andMe DNA test. How could that be wrong? But what if Eric's saliva ended up in a test with my name on it, and Carol threw away my test? That would conceal Sam's true parentage. How vile of a thing to do! I was deprived of the knowledge that I was not the father of the boy I cherished so much, and they replaced my legacy with that of that a-hole. When that idea of salvation was dismissed, I had to assess my current situation. Joe Tindle is my name, and I'm 43 years old. I weigh 175 pounds, not much more than I did in college. I'm skinny and didn't play sports in college or high school. Running was my specialty, and I was a standout member of the high school track team. Even though my family and job obligations prevent me from running as much as I used to, I still manage to get in a few miles each week and occasionally participate in charity 5Ks or 10Ks. I work for Tindle's machine company in my hometown in the combined capacities of Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer. Initially, my great-grandfather worked as a blacksmith, forging iron rings onto wooden wagon wheels and honing plowshares. Both my father, Edward, and grandfather Tindle did the same, bringing the newest metalworking equipment available to the company. These days, we produce precision parts for the metal replacement and aerospace industries. Over the 50-person company, my brother Eric serves as Chief Marketing Officer and my father Edward as President. Dad attended the best trade school in the area at the time instead of college. I am the CFO and COO because I hold bachelor's degrees in accounting and industrial engineering. Eric, my younger brother, was physically completely different from me. At 6 feet 3 inches, he is 5 inches taller than me and weighs more than 50 pounds. He was a real bully, big, boisterous, conceited, and the epitome of a jock. In his high school football career, he was a crowd favorite as a running back. While I had to work and obtain school loans, he was able to pay for his education through a small scholarship. His only college degree was a result of his instructors passing him repeatedly so he could continue playing football. Eric's physical education degree was useless to him and no other employer, so he began working as a junior mechanic for Tindle. Since a lot of our work involves precision, this was not his strong suit. Rather, he made use of his well-known brand to attract both current and potential clients. He was unable to talk about the specifics of our industry. But he was very good at finding ways to satisfy the needs of his clients. Please understand that he did a good job and was helpful to the company. We had disagreements, just like any other multi-generational company. Eric's request for a commission on new sales serves as one example. Not excessive for the field, but he was already earning a respectable wage, the same as mine. I took advantage of that opportunity to ask to retain all profits from the patents I had registered. Edward yielded to Eric with ease, but I had to fight him hard to get the money I had earned. Carol, my wife, introduced me to her thanks to her amazing butt. She participated in a 5K charity run for the high school library while sporting an event t-shirt and loose shorts. After graduating from college, I started working with my father. I had witnessed a good number of naked women during and after college, but this one stood out. Her backside revealed a slender waist that tapered into two perfectly formed, muscular butt cheeks. Even though I hadn't seen her face yet, I believed that I was briefly in love. I could have started ahead of her with my running times, but when the gun went off, I preferred this starting position. I followed her ponytail bobbing until she was well ahead of me, far enough to inspect her rear end. A-hole perverts positioned themselves to enjoy the view between her and me. I was the only person on the race course who liked her by the end of the first kilometer. Observing onlookers watch her shirt bounce up and down with each step, I figured her front side was just as good as her back. She stumbled as she attempted to avoid a fallen water bottle that belonged to one of the runners ahead of her. I stepped forward quickly to steady her by grabbing her arm. "Thank you, I really didn't want to fall on this concrete street," she smiled. "My name is Carol." "Hi Carol, this is Joe. Could I run alongside you to prevent you from falling?" I asked, and she smiled and said, "Sure." That marked the beginning of our partnership. A year after our first meeting, Carol was employed as an English teacher and held a degree in secondary education. We were married in Carol's home church while we were running. Following 2 happy years of marriage, we made the decision to begin a family. Despite numerous passionate evenings and weekends, Carol failed to conceive. Diets were adjusted, various positions for sexual intercourse were tried, and a thermometer was always on hand to determine the precise moment of fertilization. Getting my sperm to mate with her ovum at the ideal time shaped our entire existence. We could get tested for fertility later this year, but not right now. Neither of us really wanted to be tested for it. I was devastated because, regardless of their gender, I had always wanted to have at least 2 children. We both calmed down and went back to enjoying ourselves and each other's company during our sex. Carol missed her period a few months later, but she didn't want to tell anyone, including me, because she thought it would be unlucky. I was thrilled when she missed the second. I was raised believing that a person's family was one of the most significant aspects of their life. The Tindle family had lived there for more than a century. At our parents' house, pictures of the generations showed how proud we were of our family. Carol's pregnancy was not without difficulties. During the last 2 months, she was ordered to bed by her doctor. We nearly lost both my wife and our newborn son that day due to a difficult delivery. Carol's womb provided warmth and nourishment to the embryo that would become Sam. Sam had to be delivered via cesarean because he grew too big for her pelvis. The surgeon saw something during the procedure that made him warn us against trying to get pregnant again because of the serious risks involved. He pointed out to us that getting pregnant again might result in the mother and child's deaths, which was something none of us wanted. Thus, knowing that this was the end for us, we consented to his suggested surgery for her. The fact that Sam was childless made him unique to us. Sam was an energetic little boy who never stopped moving. To Carol's dismay, I liked to play rough on the floor with him. We spent endless hours kicking, tossing, and shooting balls of various kinds. While not remarkable, his grades were marginally better than those of the typical boy in his age group. The relationship between us began to deteriorate after he turned 15. I explained it away as typical. Conflict between a child and parent at that age. He said he was too busy right now, too preoccupied with his Game Boy and cell phone to talk to his father, but that they used to spend hours talking and kicking the ball back and forth. Upon being forced to make eye contact, he exhibited rudeness and contempt. Based on my understanding, he believed that other professions were more manly than accounting. He was now taller and more muscular than me, so that thought probably had something to do with it. Over the years, Carol continued to be the perfect wife in every aspect. Between her knowledge, intelligence, and total dedication to her vocation, she was now principal of McKinley School, a school that was designed to give special attention to students who were having difficulty applying themselves to schoolwork and having interactional problems with others, for example, fighting. I did notice that this stress of supervising unruly students made for some conflicts at home. She'd make biting comments about something I did or didn't do as per her definition of the task. Her irritation with me rarely extended to bedtime. She was always sweet and loving. When we slipped under the covers, there was no part of our sex life I would consider unacceptable or not frequent enough. So, I was dumbfounded when I heard my brother telling Sam that he was Sam's father and he had regularly screwed Carol for over 17 years. No way, I thought, but what did I really know for sure? Creating the biggest doubt for me was how Sam had the same body frame as both Eric and Edward. I'm the odd man out on genetic similarities. Something didn't feel right, either in my head or in my stomach, as I contemplated the possibilities. That evening, I watched Carol like a hawk after a mouse. There were absolutely no overt signs that she was having an affair. Dinner was lively and enjoyable. Sam left to go pick up some friends in his car and see a movie or whatever they do until 11 p.m. With Sam out until 11 p.m., Carol and I started the kitchen cleaning. She asked me to start loading the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom. When I turned around, the only thing she had on was a lace apron. She acted like nothing was odd and told me to hurry up, get to work as I have plans for you tonight. We laughed and played as we touched each other until the kitchen was clean. Then it was up to bed, where I was treated to some of the best sex I have ever had. I watched her closely. She was enthusiastic and very responsive to my every touch. Her belly always heaved and her neck flushed red just prior to her orgasm. Both those body parts were heralding the big O for her. Not a single clue of faking her burning desires. Post-orgasms, we cuddled and expressed our undying love for each other. The next morning, Saturday, we were to leave to have lunch at my parents' house in honor of Edward's 70th birthday. Carol didn't like to ride in my Volvo, and Sam wanted to go by himself so he could leave early. We did what Carol wanted. We all went in her Lexus. As we walked in the front door, my mother Sally proceeded to hug us in order, Carol, Sam, then me, the same order for Edward. Next, I was looking for the interaction between Eric and Carol. Eric happily hugged Sam, then held his arms out for Carol's hug, a hug that was enthusiastic on Eric's part, but lifeless from Carol. In fact, I thought I saw a look of boredom and exasperation on her face as he rubbed against her. That was not the reaction I expected between lovers who had been screwing for 17 years. Me? I got a hand clasp and chest bump from Eric. He delighted in ramming his 46-inch chest against my 36-inch chest in a form of testosterone level comparison. My thoughts were to probe the skirts of a possible affair and parent controversy. Not to be nosy, but to be more like the bumbling Inspector Clouseaus of Pink Panther fame. Maybe rattle some rocks and see if a snake comes out. During a lull in the conversations, I cast out the first fishing line. Eric, I have to go talk to our CPA Thursday afternoon. Will you be around the office to cover for me? I said that, knowing he had no comprehension of accounting processes and would be no help to anyone who called me. No, Joe, I'll be out of the office also, big project in the works. Carol blew a couple of bubbles in her iced tea with her nose. That means I'm getting close to finding something out. Well, big fella, is it something you will get all sweaty and worn out from? Nah, I've worked with this person many times, and I've always come out on top. The look Carol gave him was hotter than any of our plasma cutters. I could see the color draining from her face. No one made a noise of any kind. No fork against plate, no clinking ice in their tea. Midnight at a graveyard was deafening compared to Mom's dining room. Eyeballs were rotating between the five of them. That also was a clue that all of them knew about the infidelity. I thought I could hear the sweat oozing up through their skin. This is just what I wanted. Be clueless Joe to the five of them, but underneath the clumsiness, I was comprehending what was happening. Dad broke the ice by saying, well, you guys get your calendars to see who goes where. He continued, I'm glad you boys came today for my birthday. My grandfather bought this 60-acre tract while it was miles from town. He'd be proud that the land is still in the family and our family business is going strong under Eric and Joe. As a result of my confidence in you boys and my advanced age, I am going to retire from being president of Tindle. Eric will be the new president. There will be a change in the salary structure, as Joe's new salary will always be 75% of Eric's. I really want Joe to stay in the company and be rewarded for his good work. With Joe's income from patents, both of you boys will have about the same income. Carol squeezed my arm and gave me a warm smile. So, I will answer directly to Eric. The Eric who doesn't know the difference between a CNC machine and a popcorn popper is going to be running the company. This is a recipe for disaster of the worst kind. Listen, little brother, Eric chimed in. I've always been the take-charge guy while you have been the head counter of small beans. It takes an alpha male, rather than a chicken like you, to be the boss man. Get over it, Joe. Once again, I win, you lose. That's enough, boys, Dad interjected. Eric, you won't be the boss man. I'm still the chairman of the board and outrank you. I own all the stock. You will run the business like I tell you to. This company has been in the family for over 100 years, and I won't let it blow up on my watch. We are Tindles, and the important family legacy is in our hands, just like the men on the wall. So cool your jets. Dad pointed for effect to pictures on the living room wall of 3 generations of Tindle men. Speaking of which, Dad, which picture on the wall is your grandfather? I inquired. My grandfather is on the left side of the pictures, my father is next to him, and I am on the far end. I'd have thought you'd know that, Dad replied. I was just confirming it, as I have a question. Looking at the 3 pictures, it seems I bear no resemblance to any Tindle, living or dead. Different body style, hair color, or facial expression. Eric and Sam look like a Tindle, but not me. I don't understand that. My mother's shoulders shrunk, her face turned grey at the same rate as Dad's became red. Once again, silence broke out while eyeballs rotated between my parents and Eric. I found the best way to get people to open up is to drop a turd in their lap, then be quiet and let them gingerly remove it without getting too much on their hands. Joe, you might as well finally know the family secret. Your mother and I were planning on getting married, and your mother got drunk at her bachelorette party and got pregnant. She and I were also having sex, so she thought she was pregnant by me. She had no way of knowing we were married before she even knew she was pregnant. We both were surprised but happy because I thought I was the father. You were a weak and undersized baby. We thought it was because of your mother's pregnancy problems. you were a sickly baby, and we almost lost you when you had the Miz. It was touch and go for several weeks. Joe, you were about 10 years old before we figured out that you weren't my biological son. Sally had hidden the fact that she had sex with someone else prior to our marriage. She said you looked very similar to this other guy. When DNA tests became readily available, we tested and confirmed you are not my biological son, but Eric was. Well, that answered some questions as to how I was treated versus Eric. This was not the bomb I was expecting. I was fishing around to find out about Sam's biological father, and I got this slapped in my face. This had turned upside down on me. Not much I could do about it now, but I now had more questions. Mom finally spoke and said, "That doesn't mean we don't love you as much as Eric. We raised you as our son, and both of us still consider you as our son." That was nice to hear from her, but what does this have to do with what I heard Sam and Eric saying? Okay, Dad, that explains my body type. Why doesn't Sam have my body type instead of like you and Eric? There's another turd for them. Joe, you and Carol were trying so hard to have a baby. It became stressful for Carol. She thought she was a failure to you and came to ask your mother for advice. She remembered that you had a severe case of MS and were probably rendered sterile. Your mother and I came to the conclusion that for your marriage and the Tindle legacy, we needed Eric to impregnate Carol. Carol objected at first, but realized how everyone in the family would benefit from there being a new Tindle baby. That includes you. Joe, you wanted a family, and Eric and Carol provided you with what you couldn't produce. We hoped that this wouldn't be discovered, but between DNA tests and genetic differences between Tindle and non-Tindle body shapes, it would inevitably come to the surface. My mind was swamped by a blizzard of emotions that were swirling around like a tornado inside my head. No words. I couldn't comprehend this fateful discovery. Both my mother and wife surrounded me lovingly and tenderly, hugging me. Both had tears in their eyes, knowing the pain and confusion I was experiencing. Mother was whispering, my son, I'm so proud of you." Carol whispered, my husband, I love you so much." Dad said, "Our hope, Joe, was that you wouldn't take offense at this, but relish the love that your family has for you." "Gee, Edward, oh, may I call you Edward now that I know you're not my father? Why would you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my entire family?" Sam snarled, "Now you know how humiliated I've been having kids think you're my father instead of a real man like Eric." Jizz, everyone turned their eyes to the insolent Sam while slapping him in the face. Carol shouted, "Joe's been the best father in the world for you. He didn't spare a thing to make you happy. I've seen 1,000 kids with a father worse than him, but none better than him. You should count your lucky stars that he raised you." Sarcastically, I said, "Why'd you take so long to inform me of this generous concern for my feelings? Why not pull the scab off the wound right away instead of lying to me all these years? I'll bet you had some jolly laughs behind my back as I bragged about what a great son I had. Instead, you nicknamed me Clueless Joe." Once again, the center of the universe is silent. "We couldn't tell you that, Joe. It'd be too hurtful for you, and we hoped no one would find out. Plus, we needed you at the plant. You are the brains and the ingenuity of the entire operation. We'd be lost if you got upset and left. Also, though we couldn't afford to pay anyone as good as you, we had a headhunter give us a range of salaries for CFO and COO, and he said it was more than double what we paid you. This is too much for me to comprehend. You encouraged my brother to breed my wife for a Tindle baby, not mine. You kept me working at under peer rate just so your profits and dividends would be better. You made me think that I'd be running the show one day, but Tindle blood is more important than competence. I can't believe what you've dumped on me today. Next thing I know, you'll be telling me that my precious wife is still screwing that whole brother of mine. Here it comes, the big reveal. Will she or won't she tell me if she still screws Eric? Maybe she'll just lie like she's been doing for the last 17 years. Once again, the room was bereft of noise. Eyes rotated between the co-conspirators, yet no one denied the mortal sin. A meek voice finally moaned, "I'm sorry, Joe. I'm really sorry." But you have to understand the tension and stress I have at my job. I don't love him, I loathe him for what and who he is. However, I need him to keep me from going insane. With that, she crumpled to the floor. My left foot started to make a move toward her to comfort her, but the rest of my body said stop. She brought this on herself, now she has to deal with the consequences. I'm sorry about this, son, but son, you hypocrite, calling me son after torpedoing my whole existence, giving me the minimum of affection compared to Eric when we were kids, encouraging my wife to cuck me, pushing Eric's scumsucker kid on his mind, all the while laughing at my complete ignorance of the absolute and total disrespect you had for me. I'm done with this den of snakes. While saying you were doing this for me, you were intentionally and literally screwing me over for your own personal reasons. None of those reasons were to my benefit, they were all heartbreaking to me. I'm like a newborn orphan, an abandoned baby with absolutely no one to come to my aid, a personal and heartfelt screw you to each and every one of you slimy scumsuckers. With that, in rage, I shouted so loud that spit was coming out of my mouth. I turned to leave. Just as I got to the door, a big paw grabbed my arm. I'm sorry about this, Joe. Since it means so much to you, I'll quit screwing your wife. I've been doing her for so long, she is all stretched out, so I'm giving her back to you. The sheer audacity of that consummate a-hole, giving my overused wife back to me. Again, I turned to the door, but this time Eric spun me around. The spinning motion was of surprising value to me as I had the chance to sucker punch him. As I was turning, I aimed at his nose and swung with all my strength. Trouble was, I missed. I didn't realize how much taller he was close up. Instead, my fist hit him directly in the throat. Even though my swing didn't come close to his nose, his dark brown eyes sure bugged out of their sockets. His normal sarcastic comments were reduced to a gag and other guttural sounds. He fell to his knees, holding his throat, staring but not seeing anything. Here was my one last chance. I stepped back and swung my leg as hard as I could to the underside of his testicles. It produced my desired effect, a blood-curdling, undistinguishable scream pushed its way out of his collapsing throat. Carol and Sam rushed to him, but with different emotions. Sam was trying to comfort his mother's breeder. Sam turned to me and shouted, "You scum-sucker!" Ha! The hypocrisy of it, one scum-sucker calling another scum-sucker a scum-sucker. What a screwed-up so you have here, Ed and Sally, a mess. Carol started kicking Eric in the back as hard as she could, screaming, "You a-hole! You deserve this and 1,000 more." I left the mini-riot, got in Carol's car, and proceeded to back it into the driver's side of Eric's precious Corvette. As I accelerated out of the yard, I clipped the passenger side of Edward's new F-150 pickup. As a result of my anguish and humiliation, it was all I could do to hold the car on the road. An abandoned gas station gave me the opportunity for a respite from my turmoil. First, I cried until I thought I'd dehydrate myself, then the anger burst like a 4th of July firework. Beating the vinyl dashboard was the most I could manage in my state. Finally, exhaustion took over, my limbs were weak, and my mind numb. The cell phone's buzzing sound from the floor was one of the many calls and texts that the slut, formerly my wife Carol, attempted. With a deep sigh, I thought, what could I do now? There was no way they could undo what they had done. Not only was I a cuck, but also a true scum-sucker, with my mother not being married to my biological father. Well, isn't this an absolute storm that I'm in the middle of? 3 days ago, I was king of the world, now, all that is a world of pain. The only good thing I could think of was that I did have options. I could continue to be clueless Joe and get a raise in pay but report to Eric or Edward as my boss every day. I would see Eric and Carol, causing the same pain in my gut that I had today. That was not going to happen, as both of them had screwed up my life. No way, option 1. Option 2 was to quietly sneak out of town, let everything just continue around the Tindle family, with one share at the table being empty. That's an idea, but they wouldn't care. They didn't care about me when I was here, why would they care when I wasn't there? Option 2 was not for me. But maybe I could blend option 2 with option 3. Option 3 involved me participating in the family of snakes, but not to their benefit. Make them regret every cheating, lying, stealing, and humiliating thing they did to me. Yeah, I like door number 3. The only thing holding me back now was I was 20 meters from my house, so I needed to move on. The slut's damaged car was left in the yard, not the driveway. My computer and all my important paperwork were boxed and loaded into my Volvo. Clothes I would need for the next few months were put in my car. All other clothes and stuff I wanted to keep but didn't need right away were put in Sam's 2017 Acura. Sam's dog, Bullet, wouldn't leave me alone as I effected my escape. He was making the noises like he wanted outside. He was always a pain in my bum, and I'll be glad to be rid of the poop scooping, feeding, and walking of a dog that never liked me. Bullet did provide me a real nice parting favor by taking a big greasy dump next to the house. While laughing, I scooped up the steaming excrement and took it into the master bedroom. On our marital bed was the bed cover that my mother and grandmother made for us. It was called the wedding ring quilt, as it had different wedding ring prints on most of the squares. Other squares were made from clothes that Carol and I had worn as kids. Our names and the date of the wedding were stitched into the squares. It was a memory box of cloth, the perfect spot for the steaming dog dump to have a place of honor in this house. The final touch was my wedding ring on top of the dog dump. No doubt Carol will recognize the symbolism. All the wall pictures of the slut and Eric's son were stacked on her cherrywood dining room table. After putting a towel over the pictures to protect myself, I grabbed a hammer. I drove my biggest nail from my shop through the entire stack, sending flying glass in every direction. Now, I was ready to move on. There was nothing nor nobody making me feel I needed to be here. My loaded Volvo drove me to an extended stay hotel on the other side of town. After unloading my car, I drove to the airport, put the Volvo in extended parking, and rented a hired car. My plan was to never let the snakes find and harass me. The rental car took me to my new base of operations. An Uber driver drove me to retrieve Sam's car so I could put it in a storage unit. When I get resettled, I'll unload the car and sell it. After all, it was in my name, as a result of Sam not being insurable after his speeding tickets. A dinner of pizza and beer delivered to my room kept me from being seen by anybody. I didn't want to go out, as I had projects to complete. Projects that included moving personal funds, so no one but me had control. Joint credit cards were paid off and closed. I left her the amount of her last 2 paychecks in the general account and took the rest. Sam's going to have to study harder, as I pirated the entire college fund I had saved for him. By my monthly withdrawals, he'll have to ask his real dad for that money. Getting sleep that night took a bit of mind adjustment. I kept looking back on the good events with my family and wanted them back. Reasoning showed me the point that the people I loved didn't give a about me. Why should I care about them? After that reset, I became less clueless Joe and more fearsome Joe. Tomorrow, fearsome Joe will hit Tindle manufacturing. It would be Sunday, and no one would be in the office. Funny how that made me sleep better. My rental car and I parked a reasonable distance from the front door of Tindle manufacturing. I could have parked in my spot, but then someone would think I was there. After turning off the security alarm, then rearming it, I went to my office. Since I was the CFO, I had access to all the moneyed accounts. Tindle had 7 different accounts, so I moved all the money to the one main account, reserving enough for 2 paychecks for the staff. The line of credit at the bank was maxed out and added to the general account. I wired all the funds to our international account in the Cayman Islands. It was still company money, and I had no intention of being charged with any crime other than being a cuck. This Cayman account was established years ago as we used it as a clearing house while we bought and sold items to European companies. Now the fun part begins. I changed the log name and password to every account. No one will be able to access the accounts for some time. They won't even know where to start, as none of the banks sent paper or email monthly statements. While chuckling, I revised the postal address to 101, Big Tree Street 2, Montana 5985. I sent closing emails for electricity, gas, water, telephone, and internet. Since the beginning of time, the Tindle men had always saved every piece of business-related paper. 5 years ago, I initiated a program where everything was on the cloud. The only paper we had was vehicle titles and warranties. All members of the finance department had access to these files. I was the only one authorized to add and delete files. Passwords and logins were changed, so no one could even peep at an account. Any of the CNC machines that were online had a new password and login. Eric's office was my next spot to pirate anything juicy out of his computer. It didn't take much time to find some video files of him screwing staff members' wives, of local people, and of course, files of Carol. I put the videos on my thumb drive and left his computer undamaged. I wanted to save this retribution for later. The last stop was the utility room. Not an ordinary room but a fortress. The main line for our electricity entered this concrete-walled secure room. Tindle manufacturing consumed a huge amount of electricity when all the machines were humming. Touching the wrong wire at the wrong time would reduce a person to ashes in an instant. The electrician and I were the only authorized people to enter. The electric company bureaucracy would take a few days to shut down our service. In the meantime, I'd shut everything down from the secure room, then added new locks. By the time they figure out that it was the main transformer box, shutting off the switches, the power company will turn out the lights. It will take a lot of work to open that extra heavy door. The keys to this room, as well as all the other keys for rooms, cabinets, stockrooms, trucks, offices, and machines, were all thrown into a bucket of cleaner fluid that would clean off any identity where the key belonged. It was sad to walk out of a building that I grew up in and wanted to make my one and only workplace. Being considered the president, with Sam coming behind me to run the place, was one of my dreams. Those dreams were turned into nightmares, just like most of my other dreams during my tenure at Tindle. I had attended most of the industry conventions. I went to meetings and breakout groups. Eric took buddies drinking and to strip clubs. This is now my new hunting ground for employment. There was no need to open any of the voluminous texts or phone calls or emails sent by my formerly wonderful family. The words were just repetitive: "We love you, we're sorry you were upset, but we did what we did for you, not against you, not to hurt your feelings. Please sit down with us, or just your wife, so we can explain everything better." My mother pleaded that Edward forgave her for getting pregnant with me and they stayed married. Why couldn't I do the same with Carol and Sam? The number 17 blasted its way into my brain because Carol was screwing him for 17 years. Your mother was just a one-night stand. Tuesday morning, I called my attorney, Bob Carson, to represent me and discuss my options. He had an opening at 3 p.m., so I went back to my apartment and gathered up the documents I thought he would need. My preferred attack would be to file for divorce for adultery, but I'd have to move that witch to another state for that. I doubted she would go along with it. I did share the consequences of her infidelity with him and told him I don't want to pay child support. I'm okay with a 50-50 split of everything. I don't own any stock in Tindle manufacturing, so that was off the table. All I had was a salary and some income from patents. It was to my benefit that Tindle manufacturing was hosing me on a substandard salary, a salary I thought one day would lead to the presidency and stock ownership. As a school principal, Carol's wages were very close to mine, so the attorney thought it should be opened and closed easily unless she fought it. The plan was to do the paperwork and have her filed as soon as possible, preferably at her school. After all, she humiliated me for years. It's time to share some shame. While at the attorney's office, I informed him of the rearrangement of Tindle funds. Since I was CFO, the company gave me authorization to move money between banks. I didn't take a cent out of the accounts, the money still belonged to Tindle manufacturing. They'll just have to do some work to get their hands on it. He thought my actions were ill-advised. Joe, if this rearrangement, as you call it, results in any monetary loss to Tindle, then they can have a cause of action against you. They could sue you and possibly win. What assets do I have for them to spend huge sums of money for revenge? Besides, they wouldn't like me being in court under oath, informing the good citizens of our city why I did what I did. No, sir, they don't want that Pandora's box open for all to see. He shook his head and informed me of the $3,000 retainer check he needed for my list of manufacturers I had met and would consider working for. It didn't take very long before I had 3 meetings. These companies wanted both my services and access to my patents. There was absolutely no reason to stay in town. I had many friends I could count on to help me, but I hated to burden them. There was only one way to get myself out of this vat: to fight my way to the top and jump out to some new place. Start over at 43 years old. A week later, Bob Carson called and told me he had just returned from the county attorney's office. Edward was screaming and wanted me to be arrested for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand theft. Bob told the county attorney and Edward that all the funds were in a Tindle account that has been active for years. All the money still belongs to the company. Edward just has to make arrangements to have a new signer on the account. Of course, I knew that would require the old a-hole to fly down to the Cayman Islands, something he absolutely hates to do, fly, especially over water. A month after Carol was served with divorce papers, my attorney called and asked if I had returned her phone calls. I laughed at such a silly question. Of course, I didn't return her call, text, email, snail mail, or smoke signal. There were 2 legal issues standing in the way of completing the divorce. Carol was objecting to my taking Sam's college fund and car. Even my attorney thought it would be difficult to get that past the judge. My response was that I would let them have half of the funds. If that wasn't good enough, I would file in court for fraud, as I was led to believe I was his father and paid all his expenses over the last 16 years. I would sue Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I may not win the case, but the media would have a great time watching Tindle's dirty laundry float in social media. A week later, the attorney called and said Carol was willing to sign the papers as submitted, provided I spent 1 hour with her. Supposedly, she wanted to justify or maybe just explain the horrible things she did to me. Either way, I didn't care to see or talk to her ever again. However, the new clean slate I was creating required extinguishing any legal entanglement with her and anyone named Tindle. Under the condition that only Carol and I were in attendance, I agreed. I also wanted to have a video of the complete meeting to make sure I wasn't trapped or drugged. Sounds silly, but after what I had cluelessly endured for the past 17 years, I was taking no chances. At 3 p.m. the next week, I backed my rental car onto my previous driveway, seeing no other suspect cars that could contain people I didn't want to see. I approached the front door. She must have been watching for me as the door opened as if by magic. I must compliment her. No sexy dress to tempt me, no favorite dinner in the oven, or my special drink were on the table. 2 stacks of papers that would render our marriage legally destroyed were placed between us. Romantically, the marriage had already been destroyed, just like taking the paperwork is the last thing to be completed. She offered a drink, but I sharply declined purposely. I didn't ask how she was because I didn't care anymore. Why should I? Instead, I said, "Okay, you got me here, you can start." For the next 15 minutes, I heard her recite the Cheetah's Bible chapter and verse. Nothing new here. I tried to count the number of "I'm sorry" and "can we work this out," but her rhetoric was boring to me. She even opened up the history book and quoted how Edward had forgiven my mother. With sharp, enlarged letters, I wrote, 1 time is less than 17 years, at 24 times a year, equaling 48 screwing, on her envelope. It wasn't that many times, Joe, she said. Okay, show me the math, I replied. With a small and trembling voice, she whispered, too many. There was no anger or rage in my face, just absence of emotion. Seeing my lack of interest, she came up with something for me. Do you want to ask me any questions? Staring directly into her eyes, I said, why? After a deep sigh, she began, you know I got coerced into giving you a child from Eric's sperm. Your dad, oh sorry, Edward, really wanted that Tindle bloodline to carry on. He was concerned that any floozy that Eric knocked up wouldn't be good enough to carry the family name. Even while trying to get pregnant with Sam, I still made love to you, hoping you would be the one to get me pregnant. I really wanted to have your baby and be a family forever, but I screwed that up royally. The thought of smearing her with the same floozy name tag that Edward disliked was tempting. I'll just let her stew in her own juices for a while. I don't agree with your disgusting conclusion, Carol. I've heard it enough times to be repulsed by the premise of Eric's baby creating a bond in our family. So, was continuing to screw Eric after becoming pregnant your idea of keeping us as a family? Was it so much fun to continue some secret humiliation of me? No, Joe, that had nothing to do with you, she replied. I shouted, it had everything in the world to do with me. I was your husband, you promised not to screw anyone else, let alone my brother. What's wrong with you that you thought sex with anybody else was okay? No harm if I didn't know about it. I'm sorry, I said that wrong, Joe. I meant to say it was more about me than you when I decided to get pregnant with Eric. I found out that he was never as good a lover as you. He was demanding, it was all about his meat and what it could do for him, not me. I couldn't wait for him to knock me up. I was happier to have that crude man stop pounding me than being pregnant. He was sweaty, smelled gross, and made me feel terrible. Once I became pregnant, I stopped seeing him. Now, all my focus was on the man I loved because he loved me and wanted to please me, which you did. After being with him, I cherished how you treated me, both in bed and out of bed. So, you went back to him later because I was too good a lover? Ridiculous. This whole Eric thing sounds terrible. Hurry up with telling this sad story about how you had to screw the big, bad man that didn't please you, please. Joe, I've only got an hour for what's left of my life with you to tell the story. I still love you, but I know I've ruined my chance with you. I just want to convince you that what I did was completely unrelated to my relationship with you. You were wonderful to me, the best husband a woman could ever have. But I have a flaw. I have been very successful in my life, and it sometimes goes to my head. I begin to think I'm better, smarter, and more intelligent than my peers. I lose my compassion for others and act like an arrogant witch. And you know I do. I needed a man to be cruel to me, and Eric fit the bill. Joe, this flaw was manifested after your mother and father convinced me to get pregnant by Eric rather than you. You mean when you were bred like a farm animal? I interjected. I suppose it was somewhat like that, as there were no expressions of love. We undressed, had sex, and I left. No post-sex cuddling, kissing on the lips wasn't permitted. I found that I enjoyed sex, not the loving, tender sex we had. My world would consist of his large tool slamming into me with unbridled passion as my hair was pulled back so I faced the ceiling. My husband, my school, and my family did not exist, only the fireworks inside my skull and raging heat in me after we both came. I would shower, get dressed, and walk out, not even goodbye kisses, no timetable for the next sex session. I would contact him only when I needed rough, raw sex, and only then. Sometimes it was twice a month, sometimes there was a 3-month gap. It didn't matter to Eric how often I came to his house. To some, it was all. Joe, I went back to screwing Eric because it humiliated me, and I need that to take me down from my high horse and not be so conceited. Rough sex was what I needed, not because you were a poor lover, but I had a need I could not control. Besides, I was embarrassed to have you treat me like I wanted from Eric. You are a very tender loving person, always treating me like your queen. I was using him instead of a therapist to modify my superiority complex. Looking back at it now, I made a big mistake, and I'm sorry I hurt the best man I have met in my life. One day, when this is all behind us, I hope you will remember the moments we were happy together. That's a pretty far-fetched story. At least I know most of the facts. Or do I? Quietly, she said, yes, you know all the facts now. Do I really know? Let's find out what I don't know. When was the last time he screwed you? The last time I was with him was when I was kicking his kidneys after the terrible time at your parents' house. I presume he didn't use a condom? I asked. She shook her head no. Did you ever think that Eric's wonder dick could give you an STD? Another shrug was the only answer. Did we ever have sex on the same day as you screwed Eric? She grew pale at this question. I always douche there and then again at home. That didn't answer my question. How many times, Carol? Not many, Joe, but there were times you really wanted to make love to me, and I hated to turn you away those days. I told you I'd rather suck you off and you not go down on me. Now that you've danced around the question, let's get to the real truth. Did you ever give me sloppy seconds? I didn't keep track of that. I didn't want to do that to you, but there may have been a few times over the years that it happened that way. I've no way of giving you a number, but it probably happened. The lasagna I had for lunch at Mama Anna's restaurant was now boiling like the lava of Mount Vesuvius. The thought that I had sloppy seconds was too much for me to control. Just like Vesuvius, the hot lava came roaring out of my mouth, full projectile vomiting. Suddenly, the table and Carol were soaked with my undigested previous meal. I stumbled to the door, leaving a trail of small chunks of meat and pasta. The sobs coming from Carol stung my ears. I guess she didn't like puke on her carpet and her dress. Too bad. My attorney had to reprint the documents, as no one in the courthouse would touch them. 2 weeks later, the divorce was signed, with me retaining half of the college fund and car proceeds. She gets the house until scumsucker Sam finishes high school. I'm sure he was pissed off, but since he no longer wanted me in his life, me and all my money exited too. Since I had not fathered the ungrateful scumsucker, I refused to pay child support. If required by the court, I changed the filing to adultery and sue all the Tindles for fraud. No one wanted that shame. I was already ashamed to be a Tindle. During my self-imposed hibernation, I was at a quandary about reviewing the video files I had downloaded from Eric's office. I was still not over knowing about Carol's adultery, let alone be composed enough to watch two people I hate have sex. Each file had a name, and I had the chills as I saw the name CNRA on a relatively small file. CNRA was the name of the wife of one of my best friends, John Brown. John was 2 years ahead of me in high school, but we had little contact as he was a big jock and I was a nerd. But this nerd was selected to help the jock get through his required English class. He excelled in his science and math classes but was stumped in English class. Over the semester, we became friends until he left to go to a small college on a football scholarship. After his college graduation, he returned to our town to be near his aging parents. He approached me about employment, and I was pleased to see the emphasis on the types of math and engineering that would work well in our shop. On my recommendation, he was hired, and we resumed our friendship. A couple of years ago, JN and Sindra hit a very rough spot in their relationship. From what I gathered, Sindra had been at a girls' night out and had either been drugged or drank too much. Either way, she had sex with some guy. She was ashamed and told John as soon as she got home. But by then, the damage had been done. They had 2 small boys by this time, and it would have been disastrous to get divorced. The CNRA file was the smallest video and started with her stumbling into a hotel room. It was apparent that a cell phone camera was on a dresser. She walked like a zombie and started to stare at the king-size bed. Eric entered the picture and undressed the stupefied Sindra. I thought there was no audio, but it was because there was no talking. I had been impressed by CNRA in a small bikini at the lake, but as she stood there naked, I was breathless. Now I'd seen why John didn't want to get rid of her. Eric pushed her down in a sitting position on the bed. No tenderness or loving for the couple, just plain getting to it. He banged the inert Sindra until he grunted. After having his fun, he grabbed a drink from the mini fridge and lit a cigarette. Slowly, she shuffled to the bathroom, composed herself, got dressed, and left. Neither one had said a word during this sex show. John had always wanted to know what had happened, but now I had some evidence in case he wants to seek revenge. I had John come over to my apartment to discuss something very private. After a couple of beers, he asked about my top-secret discussion. Unbeknownst to me, John, I stumbled onto a video of your wife having sex with another guy. It appears to me she was either drugged, drunk, or both. I can either tell you who it was, show you the video, or both. Which way hurts you the least? It took some time for the big man to compose himself. Tears were building up in his eyes, and his breaths were deep. I put my hand on his shoulder but didn't say anything. Who was, all he said. Brother Eric, but she dislikes him immensely, thinks he is a real hole. Why would she screw Eric? Like I said, John, she looked spaced out. I'll show you the video to prove she was not the instigator of that tryst. After viewing the video, he now knew the unnamed guy that screwed her after girls' night out several years ago. She didn't know his name or even why they had sex. She was sobbing uncontrollably while telling the story to John. Trying to speak calmly, he asked, why would he screw an employee's wife like this? She said it was the only time, and he never contacted her again. My guess, John, is that he didn't know her last name, just drugged the best-looking woman and screwed her. He didn't need her name, just her kitty. As he stood up, he said, "Thanks, Joe. Surprisingly, this is very helpful. I'm glad I forgave her then because she was so upset and sorry. Now I know the facts, but I don't know if I will share this with CNRA or not. I'll just have to play it by ear. Can I have this video, Joe?" "You sure can. I think it's the only copy. Would you be upset if suddenly your brother suffered some accidents in the next few months? Be my guest. It'll work in my favor, as I've already kicked his nuts once, so I'll be a suspect. Make sure I know the time so I have my alias in place. Thanks, Joe. You're like a brother to me." "Yeah, and you're a way better brother than I was assigned." We hugged, and he said over his shoulder, "Keep in touch." I didn't spend much time reviewing the videos of Carol and Eric. Just not worth the effort. It just screwed up my mind. The time came for me to just destroy all of the videos with Carol's name on them. I didn't want to see those 2,304s ever again. As I was deleting the files, fate intervened and had me hit play instead of delete. It was more disgusting than I could have imagined. Carol was on her knees facing the camera with a euphoric look on her face. Well, she didn't lie to me when she said her husband, family, friends, and school escaped her mind as Eric would screw her. It was obvious she was enjoying the hell out of this. Of course, she barked like the witch she was. The woman of my dreams and love of my life debasing herself this way was devastating. This scene erased every good thought I ever had of her. John came over for a beer 2 weeks later to thank me for answering some awful questions that had been tormenting him for years. Also, to thank me for proving to him CNRA was sexually assaulted, not having an affair. He had an idea that he would use the remaining recordings to destroy cheating wives and assist husbands who had been devastated by Eric's indiscretions. I gladly surrendered the remaining disgusting videos to him. My casting of nets for a new employer was working well. One of Tindle's main competitors contacted me and requested that I travel the 100 miles to their city for an interview. This was the first flash of happiness for me in some time. Of course, I made myself available at any time and on any date they wanted to meet. The Donnan Corporation was headed by CEO and President Tim Donnan. My meeting with Tim, don't call me Mr. Donnan, went very well, and I was offered a very nice employment package, similar to my peers. There was one caveat: I had to meet with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality evaluation. Considering what I had endured the past few months, I worried about what they might find wrong in my head. The person I was supposed to meet the next morning at 10 o'clock was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner of Reynolds Resources. They did more than personality evaluations, they also handled all the HR duties, employee recruitment, corporate governance, and reporting for Donnan Manufacturing. Tim said this took a big load off his mind as he was a consummate engineer, a guy enjoying projects more than paperwork. Their office was very modern and sophisticated, a change from Don's basic manufacturing office. After giving the attractive receptionist my name, I was offered some coffee and a couch to sit on until Mickey D would see me. Once again, "No, Mr. Reynolds, it's Mickey D." To my surprise, Mickey D was actually Mickey D, a very attractive woman probably in her early 30s. She didn't seem surprised that I was stumbling for words as we shook hands, a firm but feminine grip that I found very pleasing. We spent the next couple of hours discussing my traits, preferences, and philosophy of engineering. Our conversations were polite and very pleasant. Delicately, she went into the reason why I was leaving the legacy job I had at Tindle. She knew that she wasn't allowed to ask any personal questions, but she let the door be open for me to inform her of anything I wanted. All I told her was I was passed over for president and was underpaid for the duties I performed. "Oh gosh, Joe, it's 11:45, and I'll bet you want to go to lunch. I'll send my report to Tim, and he'll be getting back to you with more details. Would it be outside of company rules for me to offer to take you to lunch? You know, kind of like giving the new employee a Chamber of Commerce tour." She gave me a sly smile and said, "I'd love to do that." Off we went on the first of many lunches that turned into dinners and more over the next few months. I was slow to enter a relationship but eager to spend time with her as I really like being around her. From her reactions, she seemed pleased with the pace and building of a friendship. During this time, Tindle Manufacturing was having a struggle financially. Even though Tindle had the cash to pay all the bills, the money was just not available. Edward had to act quickly as vendors and suppliers needed to be paid. He had to use his emergency asset to keep the company afloat. The 168 acres of prime development close to town was worth millions. However, the thought of mortgaging this property rattled all the cold bones of the Tindles that had owned that ground for over a century. The mortgage funds kept the company going until Edward went to the Cayman to get control of the money. However, the reputational damage was heavy. Instead of allowing Tindle to pay for material after 14 days, suppliers demanded cash in advance. This severely damaged their working capital, and the mortgage was not paid off as the Cayman money made it back to the States. Gradually, the details of the explosion in my personal and business world came out to Mickey D. She was very understanding as her world suffered the explosion created by a UPS truck that ran over and killed her husband 2 years ago. He was the founder and brains behind Reynolds Resources. She worked with him and held the business together after he was gone. Meanwhile, John told me that somebody attacked Eric in a dark bar parking lot. After being the recipient of several strikes by a steel pipe, Eric was begging for mercy, laying on the ground. He reached up with his right hand, the attacker grabbed Eric's middle finger and busted it all the way back until he heard bones breaking. After a shriek of pain, Eric passed out and missed the admonition of the attacker, "That's for sticking your finger in my wife." My job at Donnan created a great level of happiness in my life. I settled in, and since I didn't have a non-compete clause at Tindle, I started pirating the best customers they had. They knew I had left the company and were happy to receive my contact information. I wasn't the salesman that Eric was, but I knew what they needed and how to produce it better, faster, and cheaper than Tindle. All Eric really knew about our products was that they needed to be paid for by somebody. Eric wasn't getting out much to call on customers. It seems he kept getting hurt one way or another, usually after he was leaving a bar. 6 months later, and after the divorce was final, the relationship with Mickey D was wonderful. Besides being beautiful, loving, smart, and caring, she was fun to be with. After many dates and growing closer together, our evenings ended up being more physical. Not roughhousing, but lots of touching, rubbing, and kissing. One evening, it was apparent to me that Mickey was acting like she would enjoy being in bed with me. After dancing closer than usual, she recognized the signs of my sexual interest in her. While her leg was rubbing between my legs, she looked up with those beautiful eyes and said, "Shall we leave now?" Absolutely, then I kissed her with more passion than before. We couldn't keep our hands off each other on the way home. It was almost dangerous, but when endorphins are flowing, how could we stop? There was no button-popping, shirt-ripping contest as we slowly undressed each other in her bedroom. Both of us had our hands in unfamiliar places, breathing and heart rates were ascending. "Did you bring protection?" she whispered in my ear. "No, I am sterile." That's why Carol had Eric's baby. "What did the doctor tell you about being sterile?" "No doctor, my mother said I had the MS as a kid and that's why I couldn't get Carol pregnant." "No, the mother who lied to you about who fathered you and encouraged your wife to screw your brother. If I were you, I wouldn't believe anything she said and get your own doctor's opinion. Now I'm ready for some great sex." By morning, I had sex at least 4 times, and I believe she had quadrupled that number. After we had expended all of our sexual energy, the topic of my fertility came up. I promised to go to a fertility specialist and have my sperm tested. Of course, I'd have to wait a week until my body regenerated anything close to the sperm inventory I shot this weekend. After a humiliating turn in the jack-off booth at the doctor's office, I was told to come back in a week for the results. Since this topic was of interest to Mickey, I asked her to attend the next conference. The doctor didn't take very much time with us to say I was not infertile. My squadron of baby makers only totaled 25 million, while the average is between 50 and 100 million swimmers. The mobility of my swimmers also met the average mark. He said that unless we were desperate to have a baby right away, he would recommend going about life with no worries about pregnancy. Maybe some vitamins and no excess drinking would give a small assist. The best way to get pregnant is to not try excessively hard to get pregnant was what he recommended. It's like a game of roulette with your ball, sperm, hitting your mat's red or black ball pocket, egg. Your diminished number of swimmers have just not met up with her egg. Your odds are slim but not impossible. Mickey D resumed using birth control, and for a few months, I wore a condom. We decided that since Christmas was getting closer, it would be a good idea to move in together. She wanted me to meet her parents before we waited until after the new year. They wanted him to come to the house because she had told them she was dating a great guy, at least that's what she said. I might be starting a family of my own again with this. I was a little anxious when we pulled up to this big, unassuming house. Mickey D moved in front of me and grabbed the man wearing red Christmas sweater and grey slacks as soon as the door opened. She turned to face the right quarter of a turn and said, "Daddy, I want you to meet Joe Tindle, the man I love." "Meet my father, Joe." I said, "Mr. Donut, oops, Tim, I didn't know she was your daughter," interrupting her there. Whoa, I'm at a loss for words. "Hello, Tim. Please come inside. It's nice to see you. How come you didn't tell me that Tim was your dad? Do you not believe that I would find that interesting?" "Yes, Joe, and for that reason we kept that information from you. I wanted to know if you were thinking about my inheritance or about me. Additionally, we didn't want you to face any backlash from the staff over your relationship with the boss's daughter, who is the sole heir to the business. She shared my brother's tragedy in that he passed away at the age of 16. What does it mean for me then that your parents have invited me to share a Christmas dinner? Does this impact our relationship, and is it personal business? It means I love you, Joe, and I want you to meet my family. Business exists independently. I'm asking you to spend Christmas with my family because you mentioned that you don't have any." "All right, I've learned about Mickey D. O'Donnell is the D. I really have no idea, do I? Maybe you should have a D in your name for Durr," she said with a giggle. That's when the four of us started laughing and the tension released. It was a lovely afternoon and evening for all of us. Spending time with Barbara, Tim and Mickey's mother was a lot of fun. I may be completely ignorant, but it seemed like Mickey's parents would grant my request for her hand in marriage. Mickey would probably say yes, but I hate to take anything for granted after what's happened to me. I was right to follow my gut, and when I went down on one knee holding a blue velvet box, Mickey leaped off the couch and onto me. She briefly took her lips off of my face to pant yes, 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 but she quickly went back to sucking the life out of my lungs. It's not that I didn't appreciate her zeal. We got married in a small wedding 3 months later. John, CNRA, and a few new acquaintances I had made were the only people on my side of the church. We returned to my apartment after our honeymoon in the Caribbean and began our life together. Mickey's birth control pills had to be stopped as the first priority. Let the good times roll, we thought it might take a while for my guys to meet up with her egg. For name changes, we went to the county courthouse. Mickey D. Reynolds returned to going by Mickey Donnan, her maiden name. Since gender identity, marital status, and personal names are now more acceptable in society, I changed my name to Joseph Timothy Donnan. Tim was surprised and pleased that I had adopted the name Donnan when we asked for his approval. Tears welling up in his eyes, he mumbled, "Thank you, son." My friend JN wanted to exact revenge on me and Eric after discovering a file showing Carol deceiving him. Tyler, John's son, played sports with the boys in Carol's school and was the same age as them. Tyler gave JN several junior and senior boys' text addresses using a new address. To all of these guys, JN mailed a copy of Carol and Eric screwing under the title Principal Screwing Class 101. A week later, Carol heard someone barking sharply as she was making her way between classes in the hallway. Turning toward the sound, she thought that was odd. A handful of older boys were smirking at her. She initially believed that her skirt had ridden up her thigh or that a button on her blouse was undone. She turned around, only to be startled by bark, bark, bark from yet another group of boys. Given that the school's mascot was a bulldog, she pictured some team-building exercises being conducted in preparation for this Friday's game. The barking stopped the moment she entered the office. She didn't hear the barking repeated for the following 2 hours. However, as soon as she left the office, it began to recur from one end of the hallway to the other. She sounded as though she had just entered a dog kennel during feeding time. Everywhere she went there was bark, 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 and every now and then a howl. This phenomenon was not being experienced by any other staff members. When she arrived at the concrete parking lot the following morning, it sounded like the beginning of the Alaskan Iditarod dog sled race. Now she was the center of attention from everyone, as if she had a 50-speaker surround sound system turned up to maximum volume. Head turned away from the dog impersonators and toward the concrete, she hurried into the building. With a sigh of relief, she closed the doors behind her. A lone male voice barked like a dog as she made her way to her office. Which canine? Similar to a dog. Eric's deep voice could have been heard here, but why was he there? For what reason would he say that? It hit her like a ton of bricks when she realized what had happened. One of the videos that Eric had made her watch of the doggy screws was in the boy's possession. She skipped right over the query about how the video got out and asked, "Oh, what am I going to do? My career, my job, and my dignity would all be destroyed." She dashed into her office, shutting the door behind her. Were her employees giving her dirty looks? Were they aware of what transpired? Has anyone watched the video? Now what should I do? She hurried out of her office when the first school hour was halfway over and nobody was in the halls. She yelled over her shoulder that she was feeling sick and that she was heading home. She was lying to them, for sure. She was feeling under the weather. She didn't go home, though. She stormed into Eric's office at Tindle Manufacturing, charging down the street. "Did you give out videos of us screwing?" growled she. "I'm going to kill you if you did." Eric could sense the heat emanating from her fury. He stumbled quickly and said, "Nope, I have them all in here." "I have them all by myself," he said, tapping his computer to open the file. "You naive. Someone has hacked you. They went viral, and now I'm totally lost. Does life get any worse than this?" She collapsed to the ground, weeping and writhing, unsure of what to do. After Eric hurried to his father's office, they both hurried back to Carol, who was howling. The two brilliant minds made the decision to return her home, close the door, and resume their work. After 5 years, Carol was forced to resign from her role as principal because she was no longer respected by the school board, staff, or students. She was an expert in her field, so a job was created for her. Her new position involved reviewing all of the new state and federal policies and guidelines in an unfinished basement office. She barely interacted with other staff members in person and had no interactions with students. She went to the building at 6 a.m. with her hair oily and unwashed, wearing flannel pajama bottoms and fluffy slippers, and left an hour before school ended. She was forced by her notoriety to live as a social outcast and travel outside of the city to buy food. Sam appeared to be sent home for fighting quite a bit. It is hard not to get into a fight when his classmates call his mother Lassie the Wonder Dog. Initially, she attracted the attention of several men who sent her dog biscuits with their phone numbers attached, hoping to hear back. After I left, Tindle Manufacturing's finances took a plunge as bad as a toilet. The company's economic survival was doomed by poor management by Eric, increased costs for the CFO and CO, and lost business to Donnan Manufacturing. Edward was forced to liquidate the family's 160-acre legacy farm in order to pay off the mortgage and other obligations. The lovely rolling topography of the land would be utilized to build mid-range housing. Following the discovery of a buyer by a business broker, Edward took the decisive action that ended the family business. A significant amount of Edward and Sally's social security check went toward paying for their modest apartment rental. Gravestones would be the only reminders of the Tindle family left in the town after Edward and Sally passed away. Sam and Eric moved out of town to pursue new professions as burger flippers and used car salesmen. The buyer of the company scheduled an all-employee meeting for July 1st to introduce the new president. Eric and Edward were asked not to come. The curious crowd shifted their focus when the new shop foreman, John Brown, yelled, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to our new president, Mr. Joe Donnan." The employees were relieved to learn that they were sold to a rival company instead of a massive conglomerate that would liquidate the equipment and fire every employee. The real shock was when I stumbled out of the office and just stared. The majority of people knew me, but not by this name. "Hi to all of you. I'm happy to be back in this structure. Did I miss you?" There was a loud roar in response. I guess Eric wasn't as good a president as he thought he was. The employees of Donnan Manufacturing began chanting, "Donnan! Donnan! Donnan!" after the company's representatives gave them the assurance that usage and growth from the former Tindle Manufacturing were anticipated. Of course, Donnan Manufacturing will be listed on the building's name and on your pay stub. More applause. I'm grateful for the amazing response. This will undoubtedly be a fantastic adjustment for all of us. Let me now present you to my family, Timothy Joseph Donnan, our son, and my wife Dee. Yes, the DNA proved that he was indeed my son. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.